Well, good morning, Cerberus. Good morning, folks. We'd like to thank everyone for stopping in today and spending a little time for us. We're going to open the show just a little bit differently this morning. So, Vladimir Putin walks into a bar, okay? And wait for the punchline. Don't laugh yet, Jeff, okay? Our producer in the back, I can tell he's laughing already because it's been a long, tenuous, and tedious morning full of ardent work on Jeff's part to make things rock and roll for us. So Vladimir Putin walks into a bar and he sits down next to the guy. He says, the United States just drive me crazy sometimes. I walk into neighboring Russian country and I go through customs and they say to me, name? I say, Vladimir Putin. They say, occupation? He says, no, I'm just coming to visit. See? Now this is good stuff, right? This is great radio. Everybody lives. Suzanne's already laughing. Look at this. People live for this stuff. So welcome to the morning here with the Cerberus crowd. We are happy to have you on board. We are happy to be here ourselves. Like I said, it was a little bit tough, a little bit hard, but we got a great show for you today. We're going to talk about Russian power. We're going to talk about freedom. We're going to talk about happiness, love, and joy. Everything that was at Woodstock but was never there. Suzanne, give us some of the legals, my dear.
Well, good morning, everybody. That was Greg Junk Bond Carpenter, by the way. You were so excited about your joke, you didn't even introduce yourself. My goodness gracious. I'm Suzanne Sherman. Jeff Johnson, through some heroic efforts, got us up and live this morning. So thank you very much, Jeff. Kind of frustrating, but here we are. I'm Suzanne Sherman. This is the Cerberus Radio Network, where we defend liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny. You can follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/Cerberus Radio Network. CRN is our fan page. Suzanne Sherman's The Wasatch Report. And you can also follow me at Suzanne Sherman. We had some lively discussions yesterday. I asked people to consider whether or not they supported a proposed constitutional amendment to ban the burning of the flag. We'll get into that a little bit later on. Junk Bond also has some really cool stuff about Amazon Ring and how they are partnering with law enforcement to make your community a surveillance state. Isn't that special?
So excited.
Yes, again, we'll get into the constitutional history, the Supreme Court history of also the flag burning issue. I remember discussing this at length in law school, so this will be a fun topic as well. Things got pretty animated yesterday, so we'll get into that a little bit as well. You can follow me on Facebook. I'm sorry, not just Facebook. I have a website, SuzanneCSherman.com. All of my articles and blogs are there. You can go to the social media bar and find our network links over for SoundCloud and YouTube. So if you can't listen live, you can download all of our shows for free. We just ask that you follow, share, tell your friends on SoundCloud. If you're listening on YouTube live, we have a chat, join in the fun. And your opinions can be shared live on the air as well. You can send me also messages privately on Facebook, and I will receive those as well. I want to thank all of the new followers and likes on my Suzanne Sherman's The Wasatch Report page. Really appreciate that. That got a big boon right after my Facebook timeout. So appreciate people for joining us there. Junk Bond, why don't you, quick announcement too. Justin Spears, who was on with us last week, has yet another article that came out by the 10th Amendment Center. They published him. And he says here, do you want the return of civic literacy? You need to stop looking towards DC for solutions. So that's a good one. I'm going to be sharing that. I also shared an article by Bradley Berzer about the myths of the Articles of Confederation. So do check that out. That's on my two pages. We'll get that up on the radio network as well. Junk Bond, let's continue with this assault we are apparently perpetrating on the Soviet Union, of Russia, I should say, and their power grid. We've talked before about the vulnerability of our power grid and our never-ending war with Russia or any other state that might want to affect how we live. I think this is a threat that we really seem to ignore, but it was one of the main reasons why I try to be prepared. Think about what life's going to be like if our power grid is shut down. I tell people to watch the Nat Geo movie. Jeff, you watched it with me when we were out here, called American Blackout. The scenario was just, I think, a week or 10 days with the U.S. power grid down, and some people fared better than others, and you can learn a lot from those. I like these kind of movies as well as the novels that you can get also. give you a lot of hypotheticals, and you can actually learn from them and be entertained. But Jungban, I'll let you run with this one.
Oh, sure, no problem. So, and of course, this is the reason why we had the Vladimir Putin joke up front. See, I had to prep the audience. That's how you prep the audience. You give them a joke about something like that, and then you come into the serious issue that's really going on. And what's happening is that there's an acknowledgement now, an unclassified acknowledgement that we are attacking different parts of the Russian power grid. Now, on the surface, this might seem to be just basic annoyance as far as the Russians are concerned, because you don't see any news from RT or Al Jazeera or anything else like that, that there are numerous issues going around the Russian power grid or associated states. I would assume, allies of Russia. So it's really maybe not as bad as might be deemed here in the news here. I did a search for some other articles on this, and I came up with pretty much nothing, which was kind of interesting. Usually, when you have something of this level or this import that is brought up, like this is the article I found was in MSN.com and talked about it. And it's something that would be of this import would normally have numerous news outlets discussing what's going on and what's happening. But that's not happening in this case. This is just a very narrow reporting, which leads to the problem of, well, you know, how true is it on the other hand, right? So we have to always consider things like that. It's not like the government's ever lied to us, so I don't want you to, question or be upset about the fact that the U.S. government might be lying to you about what's happening, but
They wouldn't do
you
that.
have to understand. Never, never. I was waiting for that. Thank you. So, but you have to understand, this could be, and there's a possibility that this could be planted information, right? You never know, and that's three quarters of the problem because you're not sitting in Russia, or I didn't notice we had any listeners in Russia. So if we do have a listener in Russia, send us a note, put it up in the chat room, uh, do something. Let us know if you've got power over there, please, because the reality is this is something that can be reported by the news, but is difficult to verify. And this is an area that we can look at. Maybe in the future, we can talk about things like this. You can get information out to the public, but can the public really verify what you're saying, or do they have to an extent, trust what's being said and what's being reported is real? And there's a huge delta there between what you can verify and what you can't verify, between what's a trusted source and what's not a trusted source. If it's not a trusted source and you give them real information, how does that play out with the public? Right? How do you play out like truthful information about Republicans played on MSN or truthful information about Democrats on MSN? You see the quandary here? You can literally manipulate the message any way you want based on what information is given to different news sources. So in this situation, we could be looking at a potential, escalation of digital attacks in Russia. But without a way to really verify it, you have to take it at face value and say, okay, this is what they want us to hear. Because if they really were doing these types of operations, you probably wouldn't hear about things like that. If this is what they were in the business of doing. I'm not so confident that we've upped the ante. I'm not so confident without any type of corroboration of information. I'm not so confident that we're stepping up our game. I am confident in the fact that we are making it more of a confused information environment, that more information is being put out in uh, in a different way now. Now we're talking about digital attacks. We never really talked about those things before. We're sharing that information with newspapers. That stuff wasn't really shared before. So if this was a deliberate sharing of information by the government, that would be something that's different also, because it would have to usually come from leaks. So there's a lot of things that are packaged up in this one MSN article, other than the story that we are upping our digital attacks on Russia. Now, if we are upping our digital attacks on Russia, what's the purpose of that? Do we really have anything to gain out of another escalation of tension with, a very large country that why would you try to conquer it, right? Why would you even attempt
A few
to
weeks
take
ago,
Russia?
Junk Bond, we were talking, and you said we have all this saber rattling and rhetoric in the media how Russia's our enemy. And if they are, you had said they're really our buddies. We have all sorts of mutual endeavors with them. I think you named, our space programs with them, International Space Station. Why would we be engaging in all of these other activities if they were so evil?
Yeah, it baffles the mind, doesn't it? It boggles the mind. It baffles a person. It boggles. There we go. I'm getting my boggles and baffles. I tell you what. Yeah, it's been a while since I've been on the air, folks, and I apologize for that because I have been out all over the world from being sick and running around doing 3 different jobs. And this won't be my last show for a while because you know what I figured out how to do, Suzanne?
What?
I'm traveling to Europe tomorrow, folks. So what I will be 6 hours ahead of you characters on the East Coast here, Mr. Johnson. So I will be available to do shows because it'll be the middle of the afternoon where I'm at.
Well, that will be perfect because I'm going to be kind of going dark next week. I'm actually leaving later today. I'm going to go where there's no Wi-Fi. I'm doing primitive camping, which for me is my RV with no hookups. So I'll be away for probably the rest of the week as well. So I'm glad that you will be available. But that's interesting to
Yeah.
me. Going back to the article is they're saying power grids have been a low intensity battleground for years. And I think a couple years ago, Junk Bond, you and I had a discussion. How
Hmm.
vulnerable is our power grid, our water supply systems to foreign attack? Is this something that we should be concerned about?
I should be aware of it for sure. And concerned about it. I would definitely be prepared for everything to go dark for a period of time. Power grid is extremely vulnerable, extremely, extremely vulnerable. Uh, there was, I want to say it was 2003. It was August. Oh, you know what? Yeah, we had a power issue, right, with the East Coast. Here we go. I even have a copy of my canceled plane ticket from that day because there was no flights from Dulles to LaGuardia. Everything was shut down. It was August 15th, 2003. That's when the East Coast went dark. Canada went dark. Part of the Midwest went dark. I thought I'd save that ticket. It would come in handy one day, and it sure did. August 15th, we lost everything. And why? Because a branch fell on a power line. Now, you don't lose power to 90 something million people just because of a branch falling on the power grid. The load balance has to be very delicately managed in so many places at the same time. Heck, we just got an article we just looked at amongst ourselves 48 million people without power in Uruguay and Argentina. Well, how does that happen? 48 million people there. Now, I understand it was election day and the power grid went down, so nobody could vote. Typical
Purely a coincidence, I'm sure. But I think the bottom line is, notwithstanding the elections, there's nothing you can do about what they're doing to make that happen, is everybody should be prepared to live without power and to have a means by which to have some
Sure.
illumination at night, security,
But
have a way to have
now,
your
but who would do something like that though? That's the
right.
other question, right? Is it them? Is it their government? Is it our government? We've manipulated their governments for years. Is it them? Is it us? Is it the Chinese who own all the infrastructure there? Right? There's so many layers of abstraction that you could actually go through, which makes it even more difficult to figure out exactly whose political intent is at play here. But you're absolutely right. You have to have stuff at the house, folks. Suzanne's nailed it. I mean, this is exactly what you have to be ready for because it will happen again. It may not happen this week, this year, the next year or so, but do you really want to be in a situation where there is no power and have nothing? You
Yeah.
have to think logically about it, right?
Yeah, even living where I am, we're not gonna get too much into this, but you can go actually to my website, SuzanneCSherman.com. I have a section there, suggested reading. Scroll down, you'll find it, and one of the books is a Disaster Family Preparedness Plan by Arthur T. Bradley. It's a really comprehensive book. You can order that, through my page, and that will help us out through our Amazon affiliation program. But you know what I did here living in this harsh climate? I hardened my house. I put all new windows in, updated the doors, got a generator. I have multiple ways of heating the house. I have a furnace, I have propane, I have a wood burning stove, multiple backup ways to cook my food, an outdoor fire pit, my wood stove, camping stoves, have a means to be prepared. You don't want to get caught flat-footed if something like this happens. If you have any closing remarks, we can do that. And I'd kind of like to address that Amazon Ring and police
Mm.
cooperation. So we'll get into that if you want to wrap up this topic too.
Yeah, sure, sure. Yeah, I was pretty much at the end of this one. Basically, be ready. You don't know who is going to attack what. We are attacking, according to the news report, we're attacking the Russian power grid now. That is a stable power grid. Is it fragile? Yes, it's fragile like ours, but it is stable. And therefore, at any time, based on the political interest or economic interest of one country or another, anybody could attack a power grid. And power grids were made initially without security because nobody ever thought about the fact that they could be manipulated or anybody would want to manipulate them. So it's been a retroactive process to bring all power grids back online with security in place. Very, very vulnerable.
Quick aside, when I lived in Morgan in San Martin, which was between Morgan Hill and Gilroy, and I've talked about this on the air, there was a power substation there. It was quite large, and somebody had shot the transformers out with a rifle.
Mhm.
Within 15 minutes of that incident in the city of Gilroy was an attack where somebody sliced the fiber optic cable, and that stopped the 911 capabilities, for instance. Well, there was some ramifications the next day. In fact, I only found out about this because I couldn't use a credit card when I went to the postal service, and there was absolutely nothing done to change the security at this station. There were some lights put up, but anybody could drive right up there. It was in a remote area, considering, how urbanized that whole region has become, but it's in South San Jose, by Coyote Valley, and nothing was really done to change the security or lift it up there. So again, that also helped make me realize, there are some things that are completely beyond my control, above and beyond weather. So if you don't think you need to be prepared, pick your calamity, because there's always going to be one there. But this is interesting. When we were talking last week, I don't know if you heard the interview with Mike Meharry. We were talking about geo warrants, geo fencing,
Mhm.
and how essentially, if you happen to be driving through an area where a crime occurred for no other reason than that, you can be a target for law enforcement, where they're going to check you out, follow up what you've been doing, and use their surveillance capabilities to essentially investigate you when there's absolutely no probable cause. Well, here's another reason, another way that this is happening. Amazon Ring And we've also heard about some services where they will go into your home and put your groceries away for you. We know that there's an issue with people stealing packages in some neighborhoods. And here's an article out of the New York Post that says how Amazon is helping police officers build local surveillance networks. And, ask yourself if this is something that's good or bad. I recently saw, we're seeing a lot of footage from crimes that are being committed, and it does help identify people. I saw something very, very scary in California, some footage of a girl about 12 years old walking down the street in a vehicle that was stalking her, and how she went back and forth hiding behind another car. Finally, this vehicle drove off, and they were using this video to help identify this person who clearly looked like they were trying to abduct or at least harass this girl. Once they drove off, it showed her running home. So I'm thinking here that this was from one of those types of porch surveillance systems that people use for their own security. Fair enough. So here what they're saying is that police are Amazon Ring's doorbells are helping police build surveillance networks, and more than 50 local police departments have partnered with Ring over the last 2 years and promoted the products to citizens, building neighborhoods with security cameras on every doorstep. According to Captain Vincent Kearney, Detective Bureau Commander in New Jersey, he said, "Our township is now entirely covered by cameras. Every town we have, there are some Ring cameras." Now, Mike Meharry was on with us last week, and he's actually being sued by the city of Lexington because a court approved his Freedom of Information Act request to find out why the police department in the city of Lexington, Kentucky, were putting up surveillance cameras. And according to the procedural laws there, if their request is if they lose in court, then they have to sue you, which clearly has a chilling effect on individuals seeking assistance. So here what we have once again now, if it's individuals doing this on their own, who's going to be sued? So the police are circumventing having this be an official policy of putting cameras up. After all, if private citizens are doing this, who you're going to sue? So I found this an interesting way of getting around, that sort of liability that Mike found when he was trying to get this information. So in the police partner with Ring, this article says they get access to a law enforcement dashboard where they can geofence. Remember, what did I mention earlier and last week? Geofencing an area and request footage filmed at specific times. They can only get the video if the resident chooses to send it. Otherwise, they would need to subpoena the Ring. So either you get it voluntarily or we're going to get it regardless. Notwithstanding that, they've been organizing Ring giveaways, but there's a string attached. The caveat here, the recipients of the smart doorbells have to hand over the footage when requested, according to this report. It would start cracking down on these strings attached. So Ring is not really supporting these programs that require recipients to subscribe to a recording plan or that the footage from Ring devices be shared as a condition of receiving a donated device. Greg, I submit to you, if the police want to donate to you any kind of surveillance camera for your own good, are you going to take them up on that and accept it?
I don't think so. I
Yeah.
can handle that on my own, and I don't think that people should be involved. This is the same concept that, uh, large surveillance organizations follow, right? If they get it from somewhere else, they don't have to follow the rules of collection for them. That's been put in place as a safeguard for civil liberties purposes. They're allowed to go and, I mean, basically, they're going around the law, is what you're saying here. And this is what we talked about. We talked about Ring before. You and I have. I
Yeah.
remember a few times. And I told people, do not get Ring. Do not get Ring. Not only is it enhancing surveillance on you all the time, but it gives people access from the outside of your home into your home. You can't stop a hacker when you give them physical access to your devices. It's not going to happen. You're going to lose every time. And that's what's happening here. But now you're giving up, obviously, you're giving up the right to privacy. because you're allowing them to come in here and pretty much take control of your life. I think you really are when you offer up this type of information to somebody.
Well,
You
they're
are
also,
conceding yourself pretty
yeah,
much.
like I've said with Facebook, we've handed over the more complete dossiers to the feds than they could have ever come up with on their own, and they don't need the legal justification. They just have access to everything now. What they're talking about here is there's a Ring neighborhood app, and it's essentially a social network. Residents can share the feeds to their cameras. We're encouraging residents of Mountain Brook to purchase that type of technology and work with the app, says the police chief of Mountain Brook, Alabama. We see it as trying to create a digital neighborhood watch. Well,
Run
somebody's watching.
away. Run
Somebody's
away.
you. Yeah, run away. Police say the app is, and here's the thing. They foist this stuff. They trick us into thinking this is a great idea. What is it going to do? It's going to make us safer. It's going to help us solve crimes. Residents often send them footage of suspicious cars driving in the neighborhood, or of someone swiping a package from their doorstep. Advocates say the police partnerships with Ring would allow cops an unprecedented amount of surveillance on citizens. Absolutely. So, what we have here is a perfect marriage between law enforcement and one of the world's biggest companies, creating conditions for a society that few people would want to be a part of. And this is from a staff attorney at the ACLU. And the ACLU, by the way, is responsible for helping Mike Meharry with his lawsuit. You can get sued by these cities, and they're also going after attorney's fees when there's no statutory justification for this. They can absolutely devastate you financially, bankrupt you if you choose to go against them. So I got to tip my hat to the ACLU for getting involved in this and helping
Yeah.
Mike Perry.
Absolutely, I think that's a good thing. That's a good use of the ACLU. But the bigger problem here that never seems to get addressed, we always look for patches for fixing things. What do I mean by that? Okay, we got a crime issue. Let's patch it. Let's just increase the surveillance. Every time we get involved with something like this, we lose our civil liberties. How about and this might be just a stupid idea. Tell me if I'm stupid or not, Suzanne. But how about parents be freaking parents and take care of the needs of their children and teach them how not to be a criminal, how to grow up like a responsible adult? Are you going to have some people be criminals still? Yeah, you'll have some people be criminals still. But the bottom line is you'll have a lot less criminals if parents just stood up and were parents. Is that crazy? Is that a crazy idea?
Well, we're seeing this again, this breakdown of family traditions, traditional values, and this is all part and parcel of, again, the pillars of communism, the planks of communism, where if they can disrupt the traditional values, if we can have more crime, more instability, clearly the government needs to step in and resolve that problem. Just like, well, clearly people aren't taking care of themselves, so we have to have government involved in medical care. I mean, this is just what happens as society breaks down. Government comes in to fill that void, to kind of fix the patch, but
Right.
eventually who suffers? They don't make anything better. We just live under less and less privacy, more and more scrutiny, where we're all presumed to be guilty of something, and they actually go out and look for things. I think I don't know if I
Well, I
shared.
mean, you are guilty of something. I mean, every day you've got to be breaking a law somewhere.
Always
I
three
can't.
felonies a day, 3
Yeah,
felonies.
I can't read through that many laws to know exactly what I should and shouldn't be doing. And you talked about the article that you posted, about the Articles of Confederation, right? Hey,
Yeah.
you should tip your hat back to that document there. That thing was pretty doggone brilliant for its time, in seeing the dangers that would come from a consolidated uh, government created like the EU. You could watch in not exactly the same manner, but you can watch the evolution of the degrading of different liberties in Europe as it probably happened here in the States back in the day. I'm betting. I'm just betting that it was degraded in a very similar manner because Europe is set up in this. Same way that the states were set up.
If you want to see how absolutely absurd it has become over there, watch the movie Brexit. Yeah, I know it's a couple of years.
Oh yeah.
You see that and you will see the level to the extreme. So somebody told me once they were over in Europe and they wanted to know the conversion for measuring meat. They were at a butcher's office at a butcher store, and the counter they asked, "What does this convert to in American weight measurements?" They said the European Union prohibits us from giving you that information. That's how crazy it got. And this is the issue with centralized government. Again, read our friend Justin Spears' article. I'll put it up on our pages, published by the 10th Amendment Center. But again, we started out, if you go back, think about your school experience. When you're learning the basics of government and how this Constitution arose, we never get into the meat and taters of the Articles of Confederation. We're simply told the Articles of Confederation left us weak and vulnerable, and they were unworkable. Therefore, divinity
We were told they failed.
on a building in Philadelphia, and from the heavens rained down the holy parchment, the Constitution. And if the Constitution is not being followed, it's because man has failed the document. So we hear that
Yes.
all the time. And we talk about here, we need to dig a little bit deeper and find out why that was set up. What we have devolved into now, what was supposed to be a very limited government for general purposes, and this goes into what we're going to finish up talking about today, because we could put some time into this, is flag codes. Do you
Mhm.
think at the time the Constitution was being debated and ratified, that if they had said, you know what, this government is going to be so supreme that we're eventually going to come up with a law that says the flag that represents this new government, not the American people, not to the republic for which it stands, but we're going to put and make a law that our flag will have to go over every state flag. Forget the fact that the states created this. You must fly our flag above everything else. And by the way, don't you dare burn this flag. That's a proposed amendment by a couple of Republicans that Donald Trump says is a no-brainer. The Supreme Court has weighed in on that, and I posted this on a couple of Facebook pages. What do you think? Should this be a prescribed activity? Should there be a constitutional amendment to prohibit flag burning? And we had some pretty lively discussions there. One person even said it should be an offense for which you get the death
Death
penalty.
penalty.
The
Yeah.
death penalty if you burn the flag. I'll share with you a quick story, because I went into court when I was practicing law in California, and this judge had uh, flags in special, encased enclosures for them to protect them. They were historic flags. And I just quipped when I went there, wow, because I went into chambers with him and another judge. And I said, "Gosh, I sure would hate to be brought before flag burning charges before you." And he said, "The beauty of this flag and what makes it so special is that you can burn it with impunity." So let me ask you this. If you people think that it's not okay to burn this flag, what does the flag mean to you?
What does liberty mean? What is living in the land of the free? I think we've um, that question was answered in 1865, Suzanne, when you were forced to be brought back into a union so you could be free and experience freedom. That decision was taken away from the American people. The concept of freedom transitioned, and in order to get it back, I think you're going to have to really go through hell and high water. I don't see, unless people stand up and make something happen, I don't see this government relinquishing the controls that have been put in place. And it's not any one person that's a bad person. A lot of people in government, that I've worked with over the years, they come in and they say to themselves, well, this is what the law says. Why? Because that's what they'd been taught. That's what they learned, and they don't have the ability to critically think about anything. Most people say, "Yeah, I'm a critical thinker," and you can challenge them on that. Say, well, what do you think critically about? How do you solve problems? How do you fix things? And they go blank. They lose it because they really are not critical thinkers. And it's, not their fault other than they didn't engage when they should have back in the day, back when they should have been learning about things. They didn't learn about things.
Well, and
We
we're I'm sorry, go
our
ahead.
people have been, yeah, our people have been neutered to the point through the education system where they can't solve problems, where they don't have the ability to look at something and say, "Oh, okay, I can decipher what this really means. I can understand that this is really unconstitutional." People can't do that anymore because what they see is what they believe. And what they believe, unfortunately, in many cases, is that the unconstitutional is constitutional. Everything's flipped upside down, and they don't have the ability to go back and unflip it.
Well, the thing is,
Well, you know,
go
uh,
ahead.
this kind of harkens back to the whole notion espoused in the Alien and Sedition Acts. Back in 1798, they passed the Alien and Sedition Acts and made it illegal to speak ill of anything this general government did. So,
Mhm.
what did the great Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and John Taylor of Caroline do? They met in secret because they knew they'd be put in jail for meeting and discussing the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions of 1798. So, what did they do? They produced these, they passed them in Virginia and Kentucky. Basically, it's nullification and imposition, and they gave us the how the states respond to these unconstitutional acts by the general government. So here now today we have this whole idea. Let's put people in jail because, or as this one person once put them to death, because they burn a flag of the general government, the creation of the states. So the whole order has been taken out of context. The order should be the states and then the general government. The general government is controlled by the states. The general government's flag is not the one that should be flying. It should be your flag that's flying. So that's why on everything I own, if I have a flag on it, it's the state flag. I don't put the general government's flag on anything because my country is Pennsylvania. It's not the United States. That's a government agent of my country. My country being Pennsylvania.
Let me get
Um,
go ahead, Greg.
I was going to say, explaining the order to people is inherently important, and understanding the relationship between the states and the federal government should highlight a check and balance that should be talked about more. When the states created the federal government, I think it's important that people understand that yes, the Virginia and the Kentucky resolutions actually do show that the states have the power. Uh, the willpower lacked in other places because of politics at the time and who was in charge and how things were going forward. So, you have to understand everything in context. And if we keep one thing in context, though, Jeff, I think that everything else has to stay in context, and because we can't have that and have an evolving government, um, that you can't have anything in context.
Yeah. Suzanne, I'm going to get one more thing in because this is going to go right to you. So here we have the people. You have to place your hand on your heart and gaze longingly at the flag while singing a hymn to our God in Washington, D.C. So, yeah.
Well,
Is
the
there a problem with that?
There you go,
I'm sorry.
Suzanne. That's going right to you, Suzanne.
Well, this is
Aw.
really an issue of what's more important to you, symbols or principles. Let me share with you really quick about a message I got because I had posted something about the flag. It was actually a meme that said I post allegiance to no flag, and it continues there. And I got a message from a gentleman that said, "Our country needs us now more than ever. I really liked your spunk and thought you were a go-getter." Notice how this is in the past tense. "Someone making a difference for the good. Then you post that you have allegiance to no flag. That means we are on different teams. If you're on the red hat, blue hat team, yeah, you're damn right. We're on different teams. I will allow you to rebut. That's the kind of guy I am. Impress me, please." So, in the interest of being diplomatic and trying to turn over a new leaf, I sent him my article, "The Church of the National Government." And that's on my website. You can find it there, published by the 10th Amendment Center. Also, a fantastic article on the topic called "Bellamy's Pledge," published by the Abbeville Institute, written by James Rutledge Resch. Outstanding article. And I told him that my team is that of the principles of consent of the governed as expressed in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution is ratified. We were never intended to be indivisible, and that change done by brute force, junk bond you alluded to, 1865, and the truth hidden. We talked about the Articles of Confederation and how the absolute abilities of them to be completely successful in managing us are obfuscated. They hide that truth. Yeah, were there imperfections? Of course, but there are imperfections of what we have now. We're seeing them that are far worse. I also referred him to The Real Lincoln by De Lorenzo and Lincoln's Marxist by Kennedy. So I got a favorable response, and he actually said that he respected what I had to say there, and he couldn't really keep up with all the political stuff like he could. So he's really he stuck around, which was kind of nice. But let's turn our attention to this article that came out by Fox, and then we're going to get into a little bit of the legal history as to why we are. Jeff, you can send me a message in Hangouts and tell me how much time we have, by the way. So this article says that some Republicans in Congress Friday reintroduced a proposal calling for a ban on burning the American flag. Not surprisingly, Donald Trump supports this and says it's a no-brainer. What we really see here is just more of the growing exponentially of the power and image of the United States government as opposed to the power that the states are supposedly reserving for themselves. The proposal is being sponsored, going back to the article, by Senate Steve Daines from Minnesota, Kevin Cramer, North Dakota, and in the House by Steve Womack from Arkansas, calls for U.S. Constitution to be amended so Congress would have a constitutional to ban the desecration of the American flag. So apparently, Flag Day, there's an opportunity for more virtue signaling and putting forth another law. So ostensibly what they're saying here is if you burn the American flag in protest, we want to put you in a cage. Now, I don't think it's appropriate to go up to any other property and burn somebody else's American flag, but if you purchase one, probably made in China, by the way, and you burn it on your property, you're not hurting anybody else. What business is that of yours? Well, the responses to my query have ranged from you should get the death penalty to here was an interesting one. There should be some criminal penalties for it. But if somebody assaults you personally, they should be immune from civil liability. So if somebody rescues, I also heard comments about rescuing the flag, meaning you could be subject to physical assault if you burn this flag. And this was overwhelmingly by United States veterans. One person said, I fought for that flag, and he would absolutely take physical action if he saw somebody doing it. And my response was, I appreciate your candor because you just announced that you fought for the flag. You did not fight for our liberty. You did not fight for our security. You did not fight for our freedom. So essentially, if you burn this flag and you offend somebody who said they fought for it, you should be subject to physical assault and have no compensation for the injuries you've suffered. I thought that was an
Suzanne,
take. Yeah, go ahead.
can I ask you a question here?
Yeah.
So if someone's burning a flag and someone else goes and quote rescues it, are they not stealing someone else's personal private property?
It doesn't matter. It's the flag. It's a symbol of freedom.
Oh, how stupid of me. Okay. I must have misunderstood that somewhere.
Suzanne, and I really am interested. This article, at least these Republicans have it almost right. They said they needed a constitutional amendment to do this. It's a shame that they don't realize they need a constitutional amendment to force us to stop using a plant, to foist uh, public health care on us. But so this is political theater. That's all this is. They have no intention of ever doing this. It's just make them look good to their constituents.
Absolutely. And, there's actually a statement of constitutionality that is supposed to preface every proposed bit of legislation. In fact, it
Yeah,
was.
what the heck is that stuff? I came across that yesterday, and boy, did that really just tan my hide.
Is that just crazy? When I started researching national reciprocity, the people that the representatives that put that forward had the statement of constitutionality, laying the groundwork for this, and they just cited the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment absolutely prohibits the general government from regulating firearms, period, whether or not it's pro or con firearms. Right. But they have something as a statement of constitutionality authorizing them to have that bit of legislation when it absolutely prohibits them from doing that very thing. And they just don't get it. And that is the problem. And we discussed this last week with Mike Meharry. I said, Mike, talk about the one aspect of the Constitution that everybody seems to understand. We had about 10 seconds of very uncomfortable dead air. And he goes, that's the part. And people don't get it. Well, when I was in law school and I had my con law class, I call it con law because it's supposed to be constitutional law, but it really is a con. Again, we are taught what case law is, not the original intentions of the Constitution, meaning what was said in the ratification debates, to what did the states agree, what was retained, what was delegated. And we discussed a case of Texas versus Johnson. This was the flag burning case. This is a case that says flag burning is symbolic speech protected by the First Amendment. First of all, this is an incorporation case. The facts were Gary Lee Johnson had burned an American flag outside of a convention center where the 1984 Republican National Convention was being held. This was in Dallas, Texas. He burned the flag to protest the policies of Ronald Reagan. He was arrested and charged with violating a Texas statute. So, gentlemen, tell me where the Supreme Court gets the authorization to weigh in on a Texas statute. Well, it was.
I know, because they want to.
That's pretty much it. That's exactly it. So, he was charged with violating a Texas statute, but it's a constitutional question. People don't understand what a constitutional question means. Again, this is just like saying when they ask you what speech is protected by the Second Amendment, that's just as ridiculous as about Heller. And that's where Scalia, in the famous case of DC versus Heller, pontificated the meaning of the Second Amendment. This is a pure textualist, originalist perspective that took 63 pages to analyze the meaning and intent of the Second Amendment. What he should have said was, this law is unconstitutional. It's none of our business. This law is stricken down, case closed. But no, he waxed eloquent and went on and on and on about the purpose of the Second Amendment, what guns are protected. That's just as ridiculous as saying what speech is protected. So the Supreme Court took it upon themselves to say, well, does flag burning constitute symbolic speech protected by the First Amendment? They ruled yes. They should have said, this is a 10th Amendment issue. Under the Constitution, we have no right to weigh in on unless a federal statute is violating speech, which, by the way, they do all the time, but they don't restrain themselves. We're going to bring the states under our purview and say, no, you cannot. And then also somebody on one of my pages had just said, and this is an expert on the Constitution, had just said the Supreme Court said the states can't ban flag burning. And somebody said, what authority do they have to make that prohibition? There was no response. So I weighed in and said they don't have the authority, period. But the Black Robe Messiahs have spoken. It is in stone. So there was a 5-4 ruling where William Brennan agreed with Johnson and held that flag burning constitutes a form of symbolic speech that is protected by the First Amendment. The majority noted that freedom of speech protects actions that society may find very offensive, but society's outrage alone is not justification for suppressing free speech. Like it or not, this is a Texas issue and never should have been foisted upon us by the Supreme Court. Justice Stevens dissented and argued that the flag's unique status as a symbol of national unity outweighed symbolic speech concerns, and thus the government should lawfully prohibit flag burning. So that sort of blatant nationalism I excoriate in my article, Church of the National Government. I lost a few friends yesterday when I posted that query because people just are outraged. And what happens is you have this dialogue, and the debate on one side is pure emotional on those that think you cannot burn this flag versus factual, which is what we're trying to present to people. Look, either principles matter or they don't. And I've had people say, oh, what if your child had come home in a coffin, draped with that flag? You know what? To me, that's all the more reason to burn it, because I tell you what, if your son or daughter or any family member came home under that flag, you tell me what they died for. How are our lives better? How are we more secure and safe for that sacrifice? And that will make a lot of people mad. But I want to know the answer to that. What did they die for? Gentlemen?
I can't
Well,
answer the
Greg,
question.
I'm going to defer to you because
I can't
you
answer
are
the
a veteran.
question because there's no answer there. And I've heard the World War II argument. I've heard a whole bunch of other arguments, but I don't see where our individual lives are any better. There was a lot of debate on whether or not we should even enter World War II. People don't remember that Charles Lindbergh stood up in Congress and he made he completely exposed the whole concept of what our government was trying to do. And it wasn't to help the Europeans. It wasn't to help any. It was literally, we, if you want to talk about truth, let's go back and take a look at how we got into that war. We were big trade partners with Japan. We choked off their petroleum. What are they going to do? They're hearing undertones that we're going to ransack them, and they took a first strike. The same thing that we say that people aren't supposed to do, yet we did in Iraq. Not once, but twice. And people come home. And they come home, flags everywhere, and people say, oh, that's such a sad thing. Well, if it's so freaking sad, make it stop.
Right.
I want to rewind a little bit because you said something about our discussion with Michael Meharry, and before we run, we have about 6.5 minutes or so. I want to get back to this whole notion of what people think about our Constitution and Greg, this goes back to your propaganda because it's been widely spread in the schools, and now we see the results. We see people that do not understand the Constitution on purpose, and we all agree that the Constitution isn't a good document. We would have been better under the Articles. The Articles had much more limiting power on the general government. But if we had the Constitution that is actually written, Congress would write the laws. There would be nothing else. The Congress, and so that is the House and the Senate, had all the power. Everything was given to them. What power did the president have? A veto power. He's not the commander-in-chief 365 days a year. He's only commander-in-chief when there's a declaration of war by the Congress. What power does the courts have? Practically none. Congress can tell them what they can hear. So if we were actually living under a constitution as it was ratified, the only power would pretty much reside in the legislature. Now, I know Mark Kreslins is listening, and he and I both agree that The legislative branch is an awful thing, and I've come around to the same thing as him, is that we should have just enough law and a court system to mediate disputes among the citizens, and that's about all the government we need. But this whole notion of checks and balances, that is a creation of the public schools. It's a propaganda, and now we're seeing where this all leads us, because we have courts that rule us by fiat. We have a president that rules us with his pen and his phone. We have a Congress that does not use the delegated powers, but just creates all powers it wants to legislate on. So, and we have a constitution that's unable to control all this.
Well,
And so we're going to have an amendment to keep us from burning a flag that's representative of the agent created by the states.
going back to your checks and balances that they teach in the schools, they just have the little triangle between the three branches of government that they talk about, but they never ever mention the states or nullification. Interestingly enough, that comment that the Supreme Court has ruled that the states could not have flag burning prohibitions. This person is the one that educated me on nullification. So I don't even know why that wasn't even brought up. The states can absolutely ignore that. I do have to laugh at the irony, however, of states having a prohibition against burning the United States flag. That to me is the ultimate in irony. The article here also, this is in Fox, and this has been going around in the debate as well, that a constitutionalism amendment would be necessary, not because the Constitution mandates such, but because the Supreme Court has ruled in the past that flag burning is a form of free speech protected by the First Amendment. This is absolutely false. And one of the brightest lawyers I know actually quoted that and said a constitutional amendment is required because of what the Supreme Court said. Every time the Black Robe Messiahs meet, they have their own constitutional convention, only nobody bothers to invite the states. So this is absolutely ridiculous. This is going to be it's a stupid proposal. It's as dumb and short-sighted as the Defense of Marriage Act. The Republicans get a wild hair. They put something like this forward, and look at this Defense of Marriage Act. You can thank that for Obergefell. That's my opinion on there. But once again, the audacity to think that you should put somebody in a cage for burning a flag, go to my Facebook page. You can read the arguments for and against it. Ultimately, if you can't burn this flag, if you cannot protest this government, the flag absolutely does not mean what you think it does. Again, we need to focus on principles and not symbols. When you look at symbols and get outraged by symbols and what people are doing, that's the crap that gets hats torn off. That's the crap we're seeing where people are grabbing and fighting like little children over signs. It's absolutely insane.
Hey, Suzanne, I got one other thing. I want to add one thing here before we sign off the air. Jeff, I agree with you with the limitation on government. I think there's one other thing that needs to be added to your list of things that government should do. And every year, I believe, the states should be getting together and they should be reviewing each of the federal laws that were written and have them what would you call it when you have a law that gets unauthorized? What would that be called, Suzanne? I know this doesn't happen that
Never
often.
happen.
I was going to say it'd be nullification.
They can repeal a law, or if it's a
Repeal, that's it.
If it's a federal law that is in contravention to the Constitution and the state's laws within the 10th Amendment, they can nullify it. But again, we have the feds with their grants. They're working with the local police officers with regards to sharing civil asset forfeiture. They call it equitable sharing. What a joke that name is. We could go on and on forever. We've got about a minute. We've got about a minute left, so we're going to have to wrap up the show. I think, Junk Bond, when you're gone, there's a great article. I'm going to put it up. It's about Hong Kong and how they are actually getting about or going around the police surveillance state and maintaining anonymity in the event of protest. We could take a page out of their book. We are out of time. I'm Suzanne Sherman on behalf of Greg Junk Bond Carpenter and Jeff Johnson and the rest of the Radio Network. I want to thank you for listening. God bless you.